Hi, everyone. I'm Domenico Randazzo, songwriter and music producer, and I'm here with my cousin, Dr. Anthony Longo, and we're here in my recording studio in Morristown, New Jersey. And we are the two founding members of Real World Academy. And together we're launching our very first Keeping It Real podcast. And since this is our first episode, I wanted to briefly explain the origin of the podcast and of our organization as a whole. Currently, we are faced with a crisis in public education. Students are being thrown into a very harsh and unforgiving world without being given the necessary tools to design their future in a way that promotes success and personal well-being. Rather, students are thrown into a cookie-cutter style education system that only serves a select few. And so there's a fundamental lack of holistic mentorship in our current public education system, and it's causing generational damage. And so our organization, Real World Academy, mentors students from their adolescent through early adulthood. And while we do focus on academic achievement, we also focus on holistic mentorship, such as social emotional development and professional development. And even though we're a young organization, we've only been around for a few years, through the students that we've interacted with, we've realized that this space and this mindset is lacking in a traditional classroom setting. And so the purpose of the Keeping It Real podcast is to spread these ideas and learn from the best in the education space so we can make the most of this movement and help students design their future. And just a little side note, Anthony and I are cousins, as I had mentioned, and we grew up together. I was always the artsy kid who loved music, and Anthony was always the science nerd. But then years later, we got to discussing various issues that we ran into in high school and college, and we ran into a lot of the same trials and tribulations, despite the fact that our fields of interest were polar opposites. So that's what inspired the mentorship program. And today we are hosting Ellen McPhillip, the Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Business Education at the Miami Herbert Business School and the University of Miami. Ellen, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks so much to the both of you for having me on the first. I feel like this is a fairly auspicious moment, so thank you very much.
Awesome.
We're really excited for it. So jumping into kind of our first topic and our first questions, we wanted to get your take on basically self-actualization, which is basically from how we're designing it, is translating high school and college skills to make yourself a realistic applicant in the job force. And also competitive. And so to give an example, I have a friend who was a great artist in college, and he was really, really good at what he did, extremely talented. No question there whether he was talented or whether he had a product to deliver, whether he learned in school. He definitely learned in school. The problem is when he got into the workforce, there was no availability, and there actually might have been availability, but his lack of ability to market himself to potential employers made it so he spent years in a rut not having a job. And so the skill was there, the jobs were there, but he couldn't actualize that. And he expected, I did college and I did the art major, I got into the college, I got into the major. Well, naturally, I'm just going to get into a job. How is that different? What skills do you think make you a realistic and competitive applicant? What should these people, juniors and seniors, be thinking about?
Well, please forgive the long-winded nature of the next answer.
No problem.
So the fact of the matter is that an undergraduate education, whether you go to the top Ivy League school in the world, or you attend a 2-year college in your neighborhood community, there are some fundamental skills that every single undergraduate needs to take with them, not into the immediate marketplace, but the marketplace of the next decade. And so at the top of that list is the ability to learn or adapt quickly. Knowledge today is a commodity. And what do I mean by that? You literally can Google on your phone, on your computer, on your iPad, and there isn't a terminology that you can come up with, the most sophisticated terminology you can come up with, and you will be able to obtain a specific definition. So knowledge is easily accessed. What is hard is what to do with that knowledge. So that's one. So students, young people today, not just young people, literally, if you are in your 70s today, you're looking at another good 15, 20 years on this planet. So you better get your game on. No one's coming to your house to sort of, knock on your door. So knowledge, learning how to access knowledge and then turn around and utilize that knowledge is a skill. And that takes one, learning how to learn, right? Not only figuring out that 2 plus 2 makes 4, but sometimes 2 plus 2 may equal 4, but there's more to it than the 4. So your ability to ask good questions of the knowledge is essential. And that's one of the first places that high school students and certainly first and second year undergraduates falter because they think one, knowledge is static. It's not going anywhere. It's specific. It's stale. It's always going to be the same, so I can access it. Untrue. And two, someone is going to give you knowledge. No, you have to take in information, process it through your experiences, the things you love, the things you understand, and that process then asks you, well, what do I do with this? Who cares about this? How do I get to use this particular piece of information? Then it becomes knowledge. It
How,
is knowledge that then gets you into the marketplace.
It makes a lot of sense. So how might let's say a college junior or a college senior show that adaptability, that ability to obtain knowledge to a potential employer? Are there things that they might be able to do in order to showcase that skill?
Absolutely. Let's just say, and you are a doctor, I understand, right?
yeah,
Okay. So there are certain basic pieces of information that are required just to even be the ante for the game, right?
right.
And that's true in Domenico's field. If you're a musician, there are basic things you just got to be able to deliver on point,
Yep.
on demand, no questions. So skill is the baseline. But
Mhm.
what an employer is looking for is, have you kept up with the field? Do you know where the field is going? And what's your secret sauce? What do you bring to the table that I can't buy anywhere else that I can then leverage or utilize? So employers are very selfish, right? They're spending resources to bring in talent because they can't do it themselves. They need talent that they can get in many different places to help them accomplish a particular mission or goal. So, what you have to be able to do is show you've got skill, show you know where the market or the information is going or needs to go, and then show them how your particular skill, your particular experiences will make them a winner.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess it would be your recommendation then for students that are writing resumes, then instead of being focused on yourself saying, what can I gain from this job? What can I gain from this? Rather, maybe it should be, what can you gain from hiring me? How can I learn more so that I can better help the company? Would that be your general advice?
That's correct. And the thing that back when I was 100 years ago, when I was your age, um, a resume was a static document. It didn't live. In today's marketplace, the resume is a story. It has to be factually correct, but it also has to be malleable enough to tell a story so that the audience, who is your current employer, sees themselves in your story.
Makes a lot of sense. I see a lot of people struggling to write resumes, and it's a lot of I, how can I do this? And I feel like, that the employer is not, that's not really what they're looking for. It might look good to their resume. So we're seeing that a lot.
Exactly. I mean, if employers today know that they can buy skill around the world. So what they want to know is when you come into my family, whether it be virtually or physically, what kind of teammate are you going to be? What kind are you going to bring? A really hardcore work ethic, or are you someone that adapts easily, can do other duties as assigned? None of those things is positive or negative. It's just what the employer needs, and can you deliver?
Makes a lot of sense.
So I'm a recent college graduate, and one misconception that I've noticed from the student's perspective is that students expect that they'll arrive in college and they'll develop relationships with their professors, and there'll be a direct point A to point B trajectory, and they'll be shown the way. How do we bridge that gap in communication between professors and universities and students to better articulate that students need to take initiative, develop their own network and their own talent stack to succeed within the university structure?
Well, the one thing that I think we have to sort of demystify is that universities are made up of people. Faculty have a very peculiar job. That is to say, they create knowledge, but not all. For some, their job is to teach. That is the job that they have been hired for. For others, their job is to create knowledge and teach or research. So those three things don't always line up. So, as a young person going in, part of what you need to be able to do is figure out A, what is the content that I'm really interested in? And then two, reach out to those faculty who inspire you, or whose work is interesting to you, or whose class you finally say, "Oh my god, that is so cool. I could study this nonsense all day long." Those are not everybody.
Right.
There are some.
And Domenico and I both had those moments, those professors where you had that light bulb moment.
Well, I think that's kind of what I was touching on is you have to take that first step. You have to take initiative in order to make the most of your college experience. And for whatever reason, we're in a certain point in youth culture, and I don't know if social media has anything to do with this, but there's less of a desire to take initiative, and there's more of a desire to kind of want to be told what to do.
Well, I also want to add, so we're at a peculiar moment in time, right? The Generation Z that is currently going through the system, it is the most marketed to generation on the planet. In other words, they're accustomed to being sold goods and services. And so the trust factor is super low because they're not really sure what the motivation is behind the sales pitch. But at the exact same time, they are a generation whose parents have not relinquished control. Parenting today is full of fear. We're full of of real wisdom and understanding that the young people that we've brought into the world are in a lot of jeopardy. And so we're incredibly fearful about the messaging and the messengers who show up in their lives. And so these two things work in opposite direction of one another. And so the young person is caught in the middle, like, who do I trust? What information do I trust? And do mom and dad approve? And those questions are part of the journey to reach out to somebody new whose information set is completely different from your parents' information set. So it's gathering the trust, feeling confident enough to ask the first question and to realize that you, as the young person, is in control at that precise moment of where the relationship goes. not mom and dad.
So going on that thread too, so leads nicely into another topic that I wanted to ask you about, which is, I'll lead it with another two stories, but one is my own. So my own story with college is that I wanted to go to a school that had a definite track that would take me to medical school. That was the goal, was to get in medical school. It's a pretty easy and finite goal to aspire to, not easy to get in, obviously. And so when I was looking for universities, that was what I had in mind. And so my two choices that I ultimately came down to was, do I go to the small liberal arts college that or liberal arts school that might offer that experience, or do I go to the academic larger university program? And ultimately, I chose to go to the university program, Cornell University, because they were able to show me they had an 80% acceptance rate to medical school. That was discrete data that they had that showed me the marketplace was there. In that case, it was medical school, and they had a committee. You couldn't even apply to medical school unless you went through their committee that determined if you were able, that the school would endorse you as a medical school applicant. And so that's why they had I'm sure that was why they had an 80% acceptance rate. And that was easy for me to make that choice ultimately, and it was the right choice for me personally. And then I think of schools which offer majors for other people. For example, a friend of mine who's into music, and they offered the music major. And you say, well, the same thing. Well, they have this major just like they had pre-medical studies that you can do in college. There's a music study. I'm going to do music, and there'll be jobs in music. And this school is well connected in music. And by virtue of that, I'm going to get a job in music. And unfortunately, I don't think the school in this friend's case did a good job in marketing and being honest with the student that there are not a lot of jobs, at least in the moment, in music, and specifically in doing orchestral music or being a professional musician, that there's very, very few jobs, very, very few openings at this moment, at least, and that lots and lots and lots of students are choosing this as their major, assuming, well, I did music in high school, I'm going to do music in college, and I'm going to naturally, by virtue of that, do music as my career. So I guess my question is, just because a college offers a major, it doesn't mean that major is going to be a viable workforce choice. A job will be waiting for you. So how do you compromise between your dreams and reality? And how do you make that decision? Is having a plan B a concession, or is that actually a smart thing to do?
So, the institution that I work at, we have 11 schools and colleges. And so we're one of the few schools that has, we don't do a conservatory approach. We have sort of a setup where you have to audition to get into the school. And then you go through the various music programs, whether it's orchestra, voice, jazz, music business. One of the hard things for any young person to realize is that when you get into a school like that, you've left behind the 90% of the world. You're now in the top, you're in the 10%. And within that 10%, this is where the hard messaging comes in. Within that 10%, 0.5% are going to make it through in a place like in an industry like music, or an industry like theater, or an industry like sport. I use these three examples because they're very different than the pre-med track. So I wanted to sort of disaggregate those two.
Right.
When your job is dependent on your talent and your connections and your access, there are lots of filters and there are lots of accidents that have to happen in order for you to actually be able to feed yourself and make a family on that skill and talent. And so the reality check that you're speaking about for students who love the theater arts, or are committed to a life of uh, culture for writ large, um, It means that they've got to have a lot of things go right in order for that to be a true career option in the long term. However, the training that one gets in culture is like no other, because at the exact same time, you have to be able to critically assess your own talent. You're also critically assessing the marketplace's talent and whether or not there are opportunities there. And so that that creative critique is, for want of a better word, the most killer instinct. You have to have a killer instinct in order to make it in those spaces and places.
Can that be taught, or is
No.
that innate?
No. It's a spectrum. There are some, and we're only talking right now about the creative, and I want to get back to plan B in a second. But the creative arts or the athletic arts, however, where you're building your career on your talent, your God-given talent. You write, you understand the difference I'm trying to make here, yeah?
Mhm.
The killer instinct is what allows you to tell the world, bug off. I'm doing this. And come what may, I will sleep on 14 couches. I will go to any city in the world. I will eat rice. I will do whatever it takes because this is where I'm going. And last night I had a wonderful experience with I went to McGill as an undergraduate. She was an art student. She's 40 years my junior, which is shocking to say. But she was an art student at McGill, and McGill is not known for its art, its art design or art history majors. But her idea was not that she was going to be an artist, but that she was going to make a business out of art. And ultimately, that's what she did. So this speaks to the plan B. Go ahead, Domenico. I don't want to cut you off, but I did want to get back to the other piece of those who are not in the creative arts.
Well, I was just going to echo what you were saying, and this is a realization that I've come to recently. Art students, I feel like art students don't need to be taught how to be artists. They need to be taught how to exploit their art so that it works in a sustainable situation. And that's another gap in communication I'm noticing is a lot of curriculum and a lot of the messaging in these high art programs are teaching students what they already know, or teaching or overemphasizing some artistic muse when in fact what students are really looking for is to design a situation in which they can make their art sustainable. That's all.
So I find so again the creative arts are unusual because if I had been brave in my youth, I would have pursued a career in theater. But what I realized was I didn't have the killer instinct. I had the talent, but I didn't have that extra gear. And I went to one of the top schools in the country in the United States to figure out whether or not this was an option. But I do want to just say the thing about as one grows older or wiser, your art changes. And so part of when you have a really wonderful training on where your art can take you and open you up to the different avenues, you may not move in any one of those different directions, but you know that those directions are there. And so that facility, that ability to stretch and flex and be brave enough to explore where your art can take you, that's what an undergraduate education in art or the artistic community is about. But I do want to get back to this plan B. Just I'm sorry to talk so much, but I am so passionate, if you can tell.
Oh, we love it.
Yes.
My students come into my office and they're like, my head is exploding. You're talking too much. I need to come back.
We need more of that.
Plan B is not plan B. There are multiple plans. there are multiple versions of you. And some days, in order to actually get out in the marketplace, you got to decide on a direction. But if you have done your undergraduate preparation well, you know two things, just two. I don't care what school you go to. You know in your heart of hearts two things. One, you know what you're really good at. And two, you know what you will absolutely kill not to do. What do you absolutely know that is true that your mom, your dad, your grandmama can't tell you how fantastic you are? You know in your heart, this is what you are really good at. And the other, Lord, please don't let me have to do this for a living.
Right.
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
I think even within that, there's a spectrum, right? Because, being a young, naive musician, you develop these fantasies about what your life is going to look like. And, we're getting down into the minutia of it, but I wanted to succeed right away, making the exact kind of music that I wanted to make, which was more R&B leaning music. But I noticed that the marketplace existed in such a way where if I made more electronic dance leaning music, it would allow some doors to open up so that I could do whatever I want creatively from a position of wealth. And the fact that I pursued dance music early in my career created that platform, and so that I could ultimately pursue the creative endeavors that I wanted to. So there has to be a balance between being stubborn about your vision and being extremely open-minded about your vision.
And I might add that sometimes one of the tough decisions that a young person going out in the marketplace has to make is, in fact, that compromise. The fact that you are not going to start as a manager at a Fortune 500 company. Not going to happen. You're going to start at the analyst position, or you're going to start at the assistant position, or you're going to start at the sales position, which nobody wants a career as an analyst. But you have to learn what you don't know about this particular firm, this particular industry, regardless of your foundation at the undergraduate or the graduate level for that matter. And so this is some of the tension that happens when, especially, you pay an enormous amount and you study so hard to get an undergraduate education and you land a job and you're like, oh my God, no one's asked me my opinion about this. No one's interested.
Yeah.
Prove that you know what you're talking about.
And Ellen, you were talking about bravery before, and the bravery to pursue an arts career. I was not brave like this guy. I wanted something where it was just, there's going to be a job and you're going to get paid to do that job and you like that job. And I had some passion about certain types of art and music, but what I see a lot, especially, and this is true not only for, I don't want to emphasize, it's not just arts, this is also in the sciences, but you find somebody that, like you said, goes into that entry level job and their thought is that a year or two later into it, they're not advancing or they're not happy with the kind of work they're doing. The vision that they had laid out for themselves is not the same. And they say, well, I just need to do more schooling. So I'm going to go back and do a master's program, go back and do extra majors, do extra things. And somehow thinking that that is going to change the fact that, what their job is. Well, if I just do this master's program, if I just do this extra schooling, if I just do whatever it is, an internship, that I'm going to be, my fundamental job market, my role is going to change. And I mean, to me, again, not being in the field, but to me, it seems disingenuous. And of course, a college is not going to say, don't take our major, don't do our program, don't apply to our school. It's tough reconciling when it's going to help and when it's not going to help.
Agreed. But I think there's so I've got sort of two feelings on this.
Mm-hmm.
One, as you begin to grow into the person that is real, that is you. The amazing thing about school, whether you go on for graduate work or even professional work, you go to law school or what have you, is that you appreciate it differently. And so, what you take out of it, what you bring into it, and what you take out of it is completely different than that experience at the undergraduate level. Sometime between 30 and 45, 90% of the population in the Western world, because we can't speak about the East and we can't speak about the developing world because their cultural dynamics and societal dynamics are very different. But in the Western world, we reach this moment in time where there's a level of dissatisfaction with the choices that we've made, no matter what. It doesn't even matter. And so the hunger to pivot, the hunger to figure out a different direction. That's why at the undergraduate level, if you've done lots of different things, you have an inkling as to, how you're going to manage all of this.
Right.
The great thing about a graduate degree is that it's a shortcut to doing that exploration. It's a guided path. And if you get it wrong, that makes it awful, right? And it's no guarantee. You're still got to go do the hard work. But the other thing that a graduate degree does, especially in this marketplace, is that business is changing too quickly for you not to uptick or at least sharpen or polish your skill set. And so grad school affords you an opportunity just to jump in quick, a year, tops two, sharpen up a little bit, fill up some of those gaps that you think you didn't know you had, make some new relationships that can professionally push you into one space or another, and then you're out the door again.
Right. So what you would recommend is really limit the time that you spend in the grad school. You shouldn't be, unless you need to, but you shouldn't be spending a prolonged time in it. And during that time, your recommendation would be you got to get those industry connections or those next level connections that will afford you to get the job that you do want. In other words, just by virtue of going is not enough. You have to do a lot more.
Is what you're
Absolutely. And in today's marketplace, most top tier institutions have 1-year master's programs. At UM, we have a 10-month accelerated MBA because we realize young people, they got things to do. And so, it's a compressed experience. But the important thing to note is that, to your point, just because you go doesn't mean that there's another golden rainbow at the end of it. You've got to bring even more energy and passion and hard work to those experiences if they're going to pay off.
So students should definitely be looking out for those compressed programs, those ones that afford, a relatively quick amount of time where you're not making a huge financial sacrifice on yourself. I think, I wasn't aware of those. That's a great pearl for our students to know.
So a lot of places you're so for example at Miami, what you're seeing is undergraduate and graduate work. You literally have a seamless segue into it. You can commit early. So lots of programs are realizing that students want this opportunity to bridge undergraduate and graduate work before they finally get out. But make no mistake, this is an expensive proposition. So you can't jump into it willy-nilly. One of the things that I do want to bring home, though, and is I meet a lot of young people who are in their 21s, and they are 3.98, 3.75, 3.4.0, and they do not have any substantive work experience as part of their academic. This is a mistake.
And we see this in my field, in science. This is classic what you're describing. Going back to science,
In the arts too.
and it probably, yeah, I'm sure.
I have, how do I say this? A lot of recent graduates of art music programs expect to launch their career the day they graduate and then get upset when it doesn't work out in 2 months. And so that really frustrates me, when there's someone like me who actively tries to build a brand and build a career in and out of school. There's the expectation that you're going to get out of college, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the day you graduate, you have some type of trajectory or some path that's been laid out for you by your professors. It just doesn't exist, especially in the arts.
So one of the things that we've committed to at my school is to provide sort of guide paths, almost like, when you see the airline and it's coming in on the runway and you see the lights. um, we so that students have benchmarks or guideposts that if they're interested in finance, you need to be here given that particular perspective. You want to be pre-med, you need to make sure that you've got the MCATs ready to go here and your letters of recommendation here. And so you're finding that universities and colleges are realizing really deeply embedded in their bones that they need to be able to put these guide paths in place. The tricky part, especially with super smart young people, is that they know how to be good students, but they don't want to take advantage of the pain. And I use that word, I'm sorry. There's pain in the growth process so that you can, in fact, mentor with someone like yourself, Domenico, or someone like you, Anthony. Imagine a 4.0 student who couldn't even sit down with you and be confident enough to have a conversation outside of the fields.
Is it a structure thing? Are students uncomfortable with situations where there's not as much structure?
The notion of failure is terrifying. And part of what the marketplace in particular, when many employers are looking at a young person's resume, the moment they start to see 3.99999, the next thing they're looking for is, where's the resilience? Where's the grit? This person has succeeded amazingly as a student, but how have they combated failure? Where is their ability to come back from challenge and obstacle?
Looking at the milestones, looking at at that ability to make a student more well-rounded, would it be your advice to high school applicants to college that they should be looking for schools that have these benchmarks, going back to what you talked about, having that science program that vets its pre-med students, make sure that they're ready for medical school, that art program that makes sure that art students have a faculty mentor and that they're doing something to, are there schools that are better at this? Are there ways that students can find those types of schools that are, like you said, that are doing a better job at identifying those milestones?
There are schools that have taken that role very seriously. And you will hear them talk a lot about their mentoring programs, their career placement programs, their internship programs. But I'm going to be sort of counterintuitive here because many students are coming, and especially if they're listening to your show and they're in the high school, they're starting in a 2-year scenario. They're in a 2-year community college. Part of your job is not simply to go to class. Going to class is what you know how to do. That's the ante for the game. While you're in a 2-year school, or if you happen to be privileged enough to go to an amazing school like Cornell or NYU, you need to be more proactive and join organizations, whether it's scuba club, the music club, the corral, the dog walking club, because these types of experiences force you out of your comfort zone and they force you to actually figure out, what do you do well? How do you make relationships? How do you influence without authority? And in what ways does your knowledge translate or not into skills that someone else can use. And I just briefly, it has always sort of sat with me. Steve Jobs did not finish his first full year of university. He went one whole year at Reed. And to this day, the fact that he took a calligraphy class is the reason why, to this day, we know anything at this most popular and retail level about fonts. That's what's crazy. He
Right.
went and found something he loved. And as he matured and went down different paths of success or not, the things that he loved informed the choices he ultimately made.
And the thing that he loved and learned in his early 20s came into play in his 50s. That's really
Yeah.
when the Apple, boom and the design boom took place. So.
And speaking of passions and using that calligraphy passion later on in life, I make fun of him a lot. He tends to say passion a lot. He loves Pat's his favorite word is passion, but if you think about it in a way, a lot of students expect that, well, I'm passionate about doing this very narrow niche thing, whether it's doing R&B music only or doing a special subset of R&B music, or in the science case, I only want to do a very specific research-based thing. I only want to do this, and if it involves any patient contact, I'm not interested in that job. That seems to me to put a lot of millennials suffer from this. We've suffered from this to some extent, whereas the job that you ultimately get, maybe you're only doing that thing that you're passionate about maybe 20% of the time. Or less, or 10% of the time. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the expectation is set that immediately out of college, you're going to be only doing what you're passionate about. You'll be doing nothing that you're dispassionate about. If you get a job that has things that you're not 100% passionate about, then you've picked the wrong job.
Then they're wrong.
They're wrong.
Yeah.
They're wrong, and they should be recognizing that you only want to do electronic music, and they should be saying, you know what, Domenico, I'm only offering you this, electronic music contracts. We'll find somebody else, and we'll pay them a whole nother salary and find somebody else to do the R&B. It's the same, and it's the same thing in science. I guess the question is that shouldn't be their expectation, right? Is there a way that they can parlay that interest, like Steve Jobs parlayed that interest in calligraphy later on in a computer business, which really doesn't have much to do with calligraphy, but he was able to parlay that. Yeah, at the time. He was able to parlay that interest. How should students be looking at this?
Well, I could have said it better. Okay. Bottom line is, passion is, the workplace is not about passion. The workplace is about your ability, or one's ability, to be able to deliver a set of skills that someone will pay you for. Now, if you happen to find somebody whose mission aligns with your own mission, whose culture, their corporate or firm culture, aligns with yours, and oh, by the way, you have some decision making responsibility as you mature, then these are all tick, tick, tick opportunities for passion and happiness to align.
Right.
But nobody is out here guaranteeing you either happiness or passion. And oh, by the way, you're going to be able to make a living at it.
Passion entitlement. That's what it is.
That's an interesting.
Sorry, it just isn't. We ask the workplace to do so much more today than ever before. We look for our friendships in the workplace. We look for our validation in the workplace. We look for our passion in the workplace. It asks a lot. And one of the things that I try and help young people understand is the things that fuel you may not be the things that somebody pays you to do.
That's exactly right. And even in medicine, just to give another example, one of my passions is education and teaching. And when you're in the exam room, there's not always that opportunity. You can to some degree educate your patients. And so what I found was a way to introduce that passion into my interactions with patients, my interaction of doing my day-to-day job is I write all of my own documents that I give to patients with my medical advice. I teach them about their illnesses, but also I have students and residents in the office. And that's a way that I can introduce that passion while still doing what I need to do, what is my sole role, what is necessary. But I can introduce that passion in a way. And maybe in my advice in general, what we tell young people who are dissatisfied with their jobs or who are dissatisfied with the job market is that find a way to introduce that passion. Even if it's difficult, your employer will ultimately reward you for those passions if you can find ways to market those passions to make yourself ultimately everything exists to make the company's money, but ultimately to do it in a way that helps them, that helps you. So I think that should be the attitude that students go in with, which is I'm not going to guarantee myself this passion job. I'm going to have to work at it, and it may take years, Steve Jobs, years, but I'm going to get that.
Decades.
And the other thing is that if you're unable to in the 8 hours that you work, then guess what? The weekends are not for necessarily sleeping on a couch unless that's the passion thing that you're passionate about, right? Give some of your time to another community. It could be a four-legged community where you are leveraging or finding or fine-tuning that passion. There's so much work to be done. When I say work, I don't mean being paid. Our society has so many gaps. It needs so much to be really calibrated so that it feeds and fuels more of us. So the work is out there. You just have to be willing not to have to be paid for it.
And you're preaching to the choir. I'm a general physician. He is a music producer, and our passion is this. Our passion is talking to people like you. Our passion is helping students, helping fix the education system. And so that's why we do this. This is our side hustle, our side gig that we do. And so, yeah, we couldn't have said it better.
So yes, go ahead, Domenico.
Well, I was just going to ask, we're in a very vulnerable time for students who just graduated, including myself. Is there any overarching emotional advice that you'd give for recent graduates coming into an uncertain world?
One, patience and gratitude go hand in hand. I think a lot of young people in the Western world in particular misunderstand that by virtue accident of birth, they have everything. I took 14 undergraduates to Lima 3 years ago. And one of the places we visited was literally a city built on garbage.
Mhm.
And my students are from all over the world. And when they saw that water trucks would have to carry water almost, a mile up into a community that did not have running water, did not have electricity, they did not have a lot. And yet there was joy there. There were communities there. There were families there. So patience and gratitude, I think, need to be more expressed in intentional ways by many of those who are leaving university. Do young people today have problems? Absolutely. They're more in debt now than they've ever been. They can't be independent. There are lots of reasons to be dissatisfied and deeply chagrined about the quote unquote state of the world. But I would argue that the enormous talent and the enormous technological capacity that is now at a young person's fingertip, the longevity of life, and the access to information, these are all amazing tools that generations before did not have. And there are those on this planet who will never see. And the last thing I would say is the journey is long. There are no answers. It's only the questions that you ask.
The process. Yeah.
Well, maybe we should leave it there. That we're already at an hour, Ellen. Thank you so much for joining us. I think this was an incredible first episode. We'd love to have you back anytime you're willing and able.
You're very generous. Thank you.
Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.